There is a very specific kind of vulnerability that comes with being a single mother. It's not just the exhaustion, the endless cycle of feeding and changing diapers, or the way your days blur into a gray fog of sleep deprivation. It's the silence. When you live alone with an infant, silence is supposed to be your best friend. It's the golden ticket that means the baby is finally asleep and you have a moment to breathe. But sometimes, silence feels heavy. It feels like a weight pressing against the windows, like the house is holding its breath, waiting for you to close your eyes. We buy locks, we install cameras, and we buy baby monitors, convinced that technology will be our second set of eyes. We think these devices are there to protect us. We never stop to think that they might be the very tools that betray us. My name is Sarah, and up until 6 months ago, I was living in a ground-floor apartment in a quiet complex just outside of Seattle. It wasn't a fancy place. The floors were warped laminate that creaked if you looked at them wrong, and the insulation was practically non-existent, but it was affordable, and it was mine. After my husband left, I needed a space where I could start over with my 4-month-old son, Leo. I was paranoid about safety. Being on the ground floor meant anyone walking by could look into my windows if I didn't keep the blinds drawn tight. So I invested in a high-end baby monitor. It wasn't one of those cheap audio-only ones. This was a smart monitor with a high-definition camera, night vision, and a two-way talk feature that linked directly to an app on my phone. The first few weeks were uneventful. The monitor was a godsend. I could lay Leo down in his crib in the nursery down the hall, go to my bedroom, and watch him on my phone screen while I tried to catch a few hours of sleep. The soft green glow of the night vision became my nightlight. The rhythmic whoosh of the white noise machine coming through the speaker was my lullaby. The trouble started on a Tuesday night in November. It had been raining for 3 days straight, a relentless drumming rain that drowned out the usual sounds of the neighborhood. I had put Leo down around 8 p.m. and collapsed into my own bed. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. That specific time is burned into my brain. I woke up not because Leo was crying, but because of a sound coming from the monitor on my nightstand. Skirt! Click! It was a sharp digital static noise, followed by a dull click. I rolled over, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and looked at the phone screen. Leo was fast asleep, bundled in his swaddle. The image was grainy and black and white, but peaceful. Just interference, I whispered to myself. The Wi-Fi in the complex was notoriously spotty. I closed my eyes, ready to drift back off. My eyes snapped open. It came from the monitor again. It wasn't static this time. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of a throat clearing, a soft, suppressed grunt, like someone trying to be quiet but failing. I stared at the screen, my heart rate instantly doubling. I zoomed in on the image. The crib was in the center of the frame. The rocking chair in the corner was still. The closet door was closed. There was nobody in the room. I turned the volume up on my phone. All I heard was the hiss of the white noise machine. I told myself I was crazy. Sleep deprivation can make you hallucinate. I'd read that in the parenting books. It was probably the pipe settling, or a neighbor in the apartment above dropping something that echoed through the vents. I forced myself to go check anyway. I walked down the short hallway, the floorboards groaning under my bare feet. I pushed the nursery door open slowly. The room was empty. Leo was sleeping soundly. The window was locked tight. I checked the closet, nothing but baby clothes and boxes of diapers. I felt foolish. I was letting my anxiety get the better of me. But over the next 3 nights, the activity escalated. And the worst part was, the monitor seemed to be malfunctioning in a way that defied logic. On Thursday night, I was washing dishes in the kitchen while Leo slept. I had the phone propped up against the toaster. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the screen. I froze, suds dripping from my hands. On the screen, the rocking chair in the corner of the nursery was moving, It was rocking back and forth, slowly, deliberately. Creak, creak, creak. The sound came through the phone speaker, tinny and terrifying. I dropped the sponge and ran to the nursery. I burst through the door, ready to confront an intruder. The chair was perfectly still. I stood there, panting, staring at the wooden rockers. They weren't moving. They weren't even vibrating, as if they had just stopped. They were dead still. I looked down at my phone. On the screen, the chair was still moving. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty apartment. I was watching a delayed feed, or a glitch. I rebooted the camera, unplugged it, and plugged it back in. The image corrected itself. The chair on the screen was now still. Cheap technology, I muttered, trying to be angry instead of terrified. Anger is easier to handle than fear. I decided to stop using the video feature. It was causing me too much stress. I switched the app to audio-only mode for the next couple of nights. I figured if Leo cried, I'd hear him. I didn't need to see ghost images of rocking chairs. That brings me to Sunday, the night that changed everything. It was bitter cold outside. The heating unit in my apartment was rattling, working overtime. I went to bed early, around 10 p.m. I placed my phone on the nightstand, the baby monitor app running in the background, the volume set to medium. I fell into a deep, heavy sleep. I don't know what time it was when the sound started. It started as a low hum, weaving into my dreams before pulling me fully awake. I lay there in the dark, paralyzed. It was a melody, a lullaby. It was coming from the phone on my nightstand. The voice was humming "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," but it wasn't a soothing, motherly voice. It was deep, guttural, and it sounded wet, like the person had too much saliva in their mouth. It was off-key, monotone, and horrifyingly rhythmic. My first instinct was to scream, to bolt up and run to Leo. But fear does strange things to you. It freezes you. I lay rigid under my duvet, my eyes wide open in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Please be a glitch, I prayed. Please be a crossed signal with a neighbor's monitor. But the humming continued. It was so clear. Then the humming stopped. A voice spoke. It came through the speaker, whispering, but clear as a bell. She's awake. My heart stopped. The voice wasn't talking to Leo. It was talking about me. I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I unlocked the screen and switched to the video feed. I needed to see who was in the room with my son. I needed to see the monster so I could kill it. The video load wheel spun for a second that felt like an eternity. Then the feed popped up. Night vision green illuminated the nursery. Leo was there, sleeping on his back. The rocking chair was empty. The room was empty. I scanned every inch of that small screen. There was no one standing by the crib, no one in the corner, no one. But the breathing. I could still hear the breathing. It was heavy, raspy breathing. And here is the part that makes me sick to my stomach every time I tell this story. I realized the audio on the monitor wasn't matching the video. The white noise machine in Leo's room makes a very specific, constant shh sound. I looked at the audio visualizer on the app. The green bar that shows noise levels in the baby's room was flat. The baby's room was silent. But I could hear the breathing. I pulled the phone closer to my ear. The sound wasn't coming from the phone speaker. I had assumed, in my sleepy haze, that the humming and the voice were coming from the device on my nightstand, because that's what we are conditioned to believe, that the noise comes from the technology. I slowly moved the phone away from my ear. I held it out at arm's length. The breathing didn't get quieter. It was close. It was intimately, terrifyingly close. It was coming from beneath me. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The sound wasn't transmitting from the nursery. The humming, the voice saying, "She's awake." It hadn't come from the monitor. It had come from under my bed. I was lying on a mattress, supported by a simple metal frame that stood about 8 inches off the ground. A dust ruffle covered the gap, and directly underneath my torso, separated by only a few inches of mattress springs and foam, was a man. I could feel the vibration now, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the mattress as he shifted his weight. He knew I was awake because he could hear my breathing change. He could hear my heart pounding against the mattress. I didn't think. I didn't plan. Instinct took over, the primal, animalistic need to survive. I didn't look under the bed. I knew if I saw a face staring back at me, I would die of fright right there. I rolled off the bed on the opposite side, away from the wall, and sprinted. I hit the hallway floor running. I didn't scream until I was already halfway to the nursery. I burst into Leo's room, grabbed him from the crib, he started wailing immediately, and ran for the front door. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers numb with terror. Behind me, from the darkness of my bedroom, I heard a sound. It was the sound of the bed frame screeching across the floor as someone shoved it aside violently. Then, heavy, frantic footsteps thudding against the laminate. He was coming. I got the door open and threw myself out into the cold, rainy night. I didn't stop at the car. I ran to the neighbor's apartment upstairs and pounded on their door until my knuckles bled, screaming for help. When the police arrived, they cleared the apartment. They found the back window in the kitchen had been forced open. The lock was broken, but it had been carefully pushed back into place to look secure. But it was what they found in my bedroom that haunts me. Under my bed, they found a nest. It wasn't just a hiding spot. He had been living there. There were empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a small battery-operated fan. And there was a slit cut into the box spring of my mattress. The police told me that based on the depression in the carpet and the amount of trash, he had likely been there for at least 3 days. 3 days. He had been there when I slept. He had been there when I changed clothes. He had been there listening to me talk to my baby on the monitor. But the detail that made me vomit, the detail that forced me to move out of the state and into a house with no crawl spaces and a bed frame that sits flush against the floor, was the baby monitor itself. The police found that the talkback button on my phone app, the button that allows me to speak through the camera in the nursery, had been taped down on the screen of my old tablet that I left on the nightstand. He hadn't just been living under my bed. He had been using my own equipment to watch my son. The humming I heard? He wasn't humming to me. He was humming to Leo through the monitor speaker while lying directly beneath the mother who was supposed to be protecting him. I don't use baby monitors anymore. If my son cries, I want to hear it with my own ears. Because now I know that silence isn't empty. Sometimes silence is just someone holding their breath, waiting for you to fall asleep. We spend thousands of dollars on home security. We install deadbolts, motion sensors, and cameras that link to our phones. We build fences and plant hedges to keep the outside world outside. We obsess over the idea of a fortress, believing that if we lock enough doors, we are safe. But then, in a moment of convenience, we voluntarily cut a hole in our own defense. We install a pet door. A literal gap in the wall, just big enough for a dog or a cat, or perhaps something else that's willing to crawl. We convince ourselves it's too small for a person. We tell ourselves that no one would be desperate enough to squeeze through a 10 by 14-inch plastic flap. We are wrong. My name is Mark. Last year, I bought a fixer-upper in a quiet suburb of Portland. It was a single-story ranch house built in the 70s, solid bones, but in desperate need of a facelift. I'm a graphic designer who works from home, so the isolation appealed to me. The neighborhood was silent, filled mostly with retirees who went to bed at 8 p.m. It felt safe. It felt boring. Exactly what I wanted. The previous owners had a Great Dane, a massive dog. Because of this, the back door, a heavy, solid oak piece that opened into the kitchen, had an extra-large pet door installed at the bottom. It was one of those industrial-grade ones with a heavy magnetic flap and a plastic slide-in cover that you could use to lock it from the inside. I didn't have a dog yet. I planned to adopt one eventually, once the renovations were done. So, on my first night, I slid the white plastic cover into place over the pet door, engaging the two little spring-loaded pins that locked it. It felt secure, solid. The first 2 weeks were peaceful. I spent my days painting and my nights unpacking. The silence of the suburbs was a welcome change from the city traffic I was used to. The first incident happened on a Tuesday night. It was raining, a slow, steady drizzle that tapped rhythmically against the kitchen window. I was in the living room, about 20 feet away from the kitchen, watching a documentary on Netflix. It was late, maybe 1:30 a.m. The house was dead quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then, I heard it. Clack. It was a sharp plastic sound. Not a thud, but the distinct sound of two pieces of hard plastic slapping together. I paused the TV. I held my breath, listening. Clack, clack, clack. It was coming from the kitchen, specifically from the back door. My first thought wasn't intruder, it was wind. The weather forecast had called for gusts, and that heavy magnetic flap on the pet door was probably just blowing inward and hitting the plastic locking cover I had installed. I got up and walked into the kitchen. The room was dark, illuminated only by the street lamp filtering through the window above the sink. I looked at the pet door. It was still. Just the wind, I muttered, grabbing a glass of water. I stood there for a moment, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. I went back to bed, feeling a little foolish for being jumpy. 2 nights later, the wind had stopped. The air was still and heavy. I was up late again, working on a deadline. My workspace was in the spare bedroom, which shared a wall with the kitchen. Scrape. Thud. This time, the sound was different. It wasn't the flapping sound. It was the sound of friction, like something was dragging a fingernail across a textured surface. I took off my headphones. The silence in the house was suffocating. Click. That was the sound of the spring-loaded pin on the pet door cover. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound. It was the sound of the locking mechanism being tested. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight I kept in my desk drawer, more of a bludgeon than a light source, and crept into the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted the element of surprise. I moved silently across the carpet, inching toward the kitchen archway. I peered around the corner. The kitchen was empty. The back door was closed. The pet door looked normal. But as I walked closer, shining my beam on the floor, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The plastic slide-in cover, the one I had locked 2 days ago, was slightly crooked. One of the locking pins had been jiggled out of its hole. It wasn't fully open, but it wasn't secure anymore. I stared at it. Could a raccoon do that? Raccoons have dexterous little hands. Maybe a stray cat was clawing at it? I knelt down to inspect it. There were no scratch marks on the outside of the door, no muddy paw prints, just the plastic cover skewed at an angle. I shoved the cover back into place, engaging the pins with a loud snap. I double-checked the deadbolt on the main door. It was locked tight. It's an old house, I reasoned. Things settle. Springs get loose. But I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the floorboards. The next day, I decided to be proactive. I didn't have a fancy security system yet, but I had an old GoPro camera. I set it up on a mini tripod on the kitchen island, pointing it directly at the back door. I set it to motion detection mode and plugged it into a power bank. If it was a raccoon, I'd catch it. If it was the wind, I'd see it. That night, around 11 p.m., I turned off all the lights in the kitchen and went to my bedroom. I left the door slightly ajar so I could hear if anything happened. I waited. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. At 2:14 a.m., I heard it again. Scrape, scratch, click. It was louder this time, more urgent. I didn't rush in immediately. I wanted the camera to get a clear shot. I waited for about 10 seconds as the scratching continued. It sounded desperate, like something was frantically trying to get purchase on the plastic. Then silence. I waited another minute, gripping my baseball bat. I had upgraded from the flashlight. When the silence stretched too long, I burst into the kitchen, flipping the light switch. Nothing. The door was closed. The pet door cover was still in place, though it looked slightly bowed inward, as if pressure had been applied to it. I went straight to the GoPro. My hands were shaking as I stopped the recording and pulled the SD card. I loaded it into my laptop right there on the kitchen counter. There was one new file, 2:14 a.m. I clicked play. The video was grainy, shot in low light, but clear enough. The first few seconds showed the still kitchen. Then, the heavy rubber flap of the pet door began to lift. It didn't flap in the wind. It was pushed up, slowly, deliberately. And then, I saw it. It wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't a cat. A hand slid through the opening. It was a human hand, but it looked wrong. It was pale, almost gray in the low light. The fingers were exceptionally long and thin, like spider legs. The skin was tight against the bone. The hand reached up, the wrist twisting at an unnatural angle to maneuver through the small opening. It wasn't just reaching blindly, it knew exactly what it was doing. I watched in horror as those long, skeletal fingers felt around for the plastic slide lock. The fingernails were dark and jagged. They scratched against the plastic cover, scritch, scritch, trying to find the release pin. The hand pushed. The plastic cover bowed inward under the pressure. I could see the strain in the tendons of the wrist. Then a second hand appeared. This one grabbed the bottom frame of the pet door, bracing itself to pull. They weren't just trying to unlock it. They were trying to pull themselves through. The video showed the hands working frantically for about 20 seconds. The clicking sound I heard was the fingernails tapping against the locking pins. Then, abruptly, the hands froze. The camera has a small red LED that blinks when it's recording. In the video, the hand stopped moving. The fingers curled back slightly. Whoever it was, they saw the camera light. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, the hands withdrew. They didn't panic and jerk back. They slid back out into the darkness with a fluid, silent motion. The flap lowered back down without a sound. The video ended. I sat there in my kitchen, the laptop screen glowing in the dark, feeling a level of primal terror I didn't know existed. I wasn't scared because someone tried to break in. People break into houses all the time. I was scared because of the size of the hole. I looked at the pet door. It measured 14 inches wide by 20 inches tall. A normal-sized human adult cannot fit through that. A child could, but those hands, those were not the hands of a child. They were weathered, scarred, and large. Whoever was on the other side of that door was contorting themselves, compressing their body in a way that shouldn't be possible, just to get to me. I called the police immediately. They arrived in 10 minutes. They swept the backyard with flashlights. The grass was wet from the morning dew. "Sir," the officer called me over to the back door. He pointed his flashlight at the ground, right in front of the pet door. There were marks in the mud, but they weren't footprints. They were long, dragging indentations, like a snake or someone crawling on their belly, dragging their legs behind them. The tracks led from the dense woods behind my property right up to my door, and then turned back around. But that wasn't the worst part. The officer shined his light on the exterior of the doorframe, about 3 feet off the ground. "You said you saw hands?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling. "Well," the officer said, grimacing, "whatever was back here, it wasn't standing up." There were muddy smudges all around the pet door frame, but there were no handprints on the doorknob, no attempts to pick the main lock, no footprints standing by the door. The intruder had crawled all the way from the woods, slithered up to the door and lay flat on their stomach to reach through. They never once tried the handle. They only wanted the small hole. I moved out the next morning. I stayed in a hotel until I could sell the house. I took a loss on the property, but I didn't care. I live in a second-floor apartment now. I have steel-reinforced doors and no windows that open more than a few inches. And I don't have any pets. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows and rattles the window frames, I close my eyes, and I can still see those long, pale fingers scratching at the plastic. And I wonder, if I hadn't put that slide lock on, how far would they have crawled into my house before I woke up? Curiosity is a funny thing. It's supposed to be the trait that helped us evolve, discover fire, and build civilizations. But in the modern world, curiosity is often the very thing that gets us into trouble. We see a "do not enter" sign, and instead of walking away, our brains immediately ask, why? We see a locked door in a rental property, and we don't think about safety, we think about secrets. Landlords love to have their rules. No pets, no smoking, quiet hours after 10 p.m. But sometimes you find a lease agreement with a rule so specific, so strange, that you should probably just tear up the check and walk away. I didn't. I signed the lease. And because of that, I learned that some doors are locked not to keep you out, but to keep something else in. My name is David. 2 years ago, I was a junior copywriter in Chicago, broke and desperate for an apartment that didn't cost half my monthly salary. I found a listing on Craigslist for the lower unit of a duplex in a historic, albeit slightly run-down neighborhood. The rent was suspiciously low, $800 a month for a 2-bedroom place with hardwood floors. The landlord, a nervous, sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, met me for the tour. He was in a rush, checking his watch every 30 seconds. The apartment was decent. It had that old house smell, dust and lemon polish, but it was clean. Then we got to the kitchen. In the back corner, near the pantry, was a heavy, solid wood door. It was painted a thick, glossy white, contrasting with the peeling beige wallpaper. But the strange part was the hardware. It didn't have a doorknob. Instead, it had a heavy-duty iron hasp and a massive master padlock securing it. "What's in there?" I asked, pointing to the door. Mr. Henderson didn't even look at it. "Basement. It's strictly for storage. My storage. It's unfinished, floods when it rains, mold issues. You don't have a key, and you are not to tamper with the lock. It's in the lease. Violation means immediate eviction." He said it so fast it sounded rehearsed. "Okay," I said, shrugging. "I don't need a damp basement anyway." I moved in that weekend. The first month was surprisingly normal. The house was quiet. The guy who lived in the upper unit, a man I only knew as the night shift guy, because I only heard his heavy boots leaving at 10 p.m. and returning at 6 a.m., kept to himself. The trouble started in late October. It was the kind of autumn that seeps into your bones, damp, gray, and windy. I was sitting at the kitchen table around 1 a.m., working on a freelance project. The house was silent, save for the occasional rattle of the window panes. Then, I felt it before I heard it. Thud. A dull vibration traveled up through the soles of my feet. It was faint, like something heavy being dropped on dirt. I paused my typing. I looked at the basement door. Scrape. Curr. It was the sound of wood dragging against concrete. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. Just the boiler, I told myself. Old houses make noise. Pipes expand, foundations settle. I put my headphones on and ignored it. But 3 nights later, the sounds changed. It wasn't just mechanical settling anymore. It was rhythmic. I was in the kitchen again, making a late-night sandwich. I was standing right next to the basement door. Step, step, step. Soft, shuffling sounds, like someone walking in socks on a gritty floor. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they were directly beneath me. I froze, holding the knife midair. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the cold, painted wood of the door. Silence. Then, a cough. It was dry, muffled, and unmistakably human. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled back from the door as if it had burned me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone down there?" No answer, just the oppressive silence of the house. I texted Mr. Henderson immediately. "Hey, I think there's someone in the basement. I heard coughing." He replied 2 minutes later. "Impossible. I have the only key. It's just the pipes. Old plumbing makes weird noises. Don't touch the lock." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But pipes don't cough. The next week became a psychological nightmare. I started obsessing over that door. I put a piece of clear Scotch tape over the padlock to see if Mr. Henderson was coming in while I was at work. The tape remained unbroken. If the landlord wasn't going in, and I wasn't going in, then who was walking around down there at 2 a.m.? The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I had stayed home sick with the flu. I was lying on the couch in the living room, drifting in and out of a feverish sleep. The living room was directly above the main section of the basement. Around noon, I woke up to a sound that made my blood freeze. It was a voice. Not a cough, not a footstep. A voice. It was muttering, low, angry muttering. It sounded like a man having an argument with himself. The tone was aggressive, rising and falling in pitch. I rolled off the couch and put my ear to the floorboards. I could hear individual words now. "Take it. No. Mine. Almost through. Shut up." I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I told them I thought there was an intruder in the basement. The police arrived in 10 minutes. They knocked on the basement door. No answer. They asked me for the key. I told them I didn't have one. The officer, a burly guy named Officer Miller, looked at the padlock. "I can cut this, but if there's no one down there, your landlord is going to be pissed about the damage." "Cut it," I said. "I don't care." Miller went to his cruiser and came back with bolt cutters. Snap. The padlock fell to the floor with a heavy clatter. He drew his weapon and kicked the door open. A wave of smell hit us instantly. It wasn't the smell of mold or dampness like Henderson had said. It was the smell of stale food, unwashed body odor, and earth. Miller went down first, flashlight sweeping the darkness. "Police, come out!" I waited at the top of the stairs. "Clear," Miller shouted after a minute. "You better come see this, son." I walked down the wooden stairs. They creaked violently under my weight. The basement wasn't a storage unit. It was a living space. In the center of the room, on a dirty mattress, was a nest of blankets. There were empty cans of beans, wrappers, and a bucket that had clearly been used as a toilet. But that wasn't the scary part. A squatter would be scary, sure, but this was worse. Officer Miller shined his light on the far wall, the one that faced the east side of the property. The brick foundation had been dismantled. A hole, roughly 3 feet wide, had been meticulously chiseled through the double-layer brick wall. It led into a dark, narrow tunnel. "Where does that go?" I whispered, feeling nauseous. "If my orientation is right," Miller said, his face grim, "that leads directly into the basement of the house next door." The house next door was abandoned, boarded up, condemned by the city 2 years ago. We found the tools near the hole, a pickaxe, a shovel, and a pile of rags. But then, Officer Miller's flashlight beam caught something else. Something that made me realize the muttering I heard wasn't just a crazy man talking to himself. It was a rehearsal. Taped to the wall, right next to the mattress, were photos. They were photos of me. Photos of me sleeping on the couch. Photos of me eating at the kitchen table. Photos taken from the street through my bedroom window. And right in the center of the collage was an architectural blueprint of my apartment. Red marker lines were drawn all over the floor plan. There were X marks in specific spots. One under the kitchen table, one under my bed, one under the couch. The officer looked at the ceiling above us. He traced the location of the X marks. "He wasn't just living here," Miller said quietly. "He was drilling." I looked up. In the wooden subflooring between the joists, directly above the mattress, were small, freshly drilled holes. They were tiny, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide, too small to notice from up inside the apartment unless you were looking for them. He had been drilling spy holes up into my floor. The muttering. "Almost through." He wasn't talking about the tunnel. He was talking about the floor. He was preparing to cut through. The police raided the abandoned house next door. They found a labyrinth of tunnels connecting 3 different properties on the block. The man, a former construction worker with a history of stalking charges, was never found. He must have heard the police sirens and slipped out through one of his other exits. I moved out that same day. I left my furniture. I left my deposit. I didn't care. I live in a high-rise now. Concrete floors, steel beams, no basements. But sometimes, when I'm sitting in my living room and I hear the neighbor below me hang a picture or bump the ceiling, I don't feel annoyed. I feel panic. I freeze, and I look at my floor. And I wonder if those sounds are just neighbors living their lives, or if someone is down there, pressing their eye against a tiny invisible hole, waiting for the right moment to come up. Because the scariest doors aren't the ones that are locked to keep you out. They are the ones locked to keep you from seeing what's underneath you. We are taught from a young age that walls are barriers. They are the solid, unyielding lines that define our safety. We lock our doors, close our windows, and feel secure, believing that the 4 walls of our bedroom are a fortress that keeps the chaos of the world at bay. We hang pictures on them, push our beds against them, and lean on them, never stopping to consider what lies inside them. Architects call it dead space. It's the hollow void between the drywall and the insulation, a dark, narrow network where wires run and pipes rattle. But sometimes, dead space isn't dead at all. Sometimes it's a hallway for things that don't want to be seen. And sometimes, the only thing separating you from a pair of watching eyes is half an inch of painted plaster. My name is Emily. 3 years ago, I was a sophomore in college, living in a cramped studio apartment in an old building near campus. It was a pre-war building, which is real estate code for drafty, creaky, and poorly maintained. But the rent was cheap, and it had a large walk-in closet that sold me on the place immediately. The layout was simple. A main room that served as a bedroom and living area, a tiny kitchenette, a bathroom, and that massive closet built into the far wall. The closet was weirdly deep, extending further back than the blueprint suggested, but I just saw it as extra storage for my shoe collection. The first month was a blur of studying and partying. I was rarely home except to sleep. But as midterms approached, I started spending more time in the apartment, and that's when the glitches started. It began with the food. I'm a creature of habit. I buy the same groceries every Sunday: Greek yogurt, granola, apples, and sliced turkey. One Tuesday morning, I went to the fridge to grab a yogurt for breakfast. I reached for the pack. It was empty. The cardboard sleeve was there, sitting on the shelf, but the 4 plastic cups were gone. I stared at the empty sleeve, blinking. Did I eat them? I tried to replay the last 2 days. I remembered eating one on Monday. Maybe I had a late-night snack I forgot about? College stress does weird things to your memory. I threw the sleeve away, feeling a bit foggy, and went to class. 2 days later, it was the turkey. I had bought a pound of it. I opened the Tupperware container to make a sandwich, and there were only 2 slices left. "Okay," I said aloud to the empty room. "I'm losing my mind." I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I sleep-eating? Was I sleepwalking? I had heard stories of people on Ambien cooking full meals in their sleep, but I wasn't taking any medication. Then, the activity moved from the kitchen to the bedroom. I'm messy, but I'm organized in my messiness. I always leave my hairbrush on the right side of the sink. I always leave my remote control on the coffee table. One evening, I came home from the library to find my remote control sitting on top of the microwave. I froze in the doorway, my backpack slipping from my shoulder. Why would I put it there? I don't even own a TV in the kitchen. It made no sense. I checked the windows. Locked. I checked the deadbolt. It was still engaged when I unlocked it to get in. "Just stress," I whispered. "You're stressed, Em. Focus." But the atmosphere in the apartment had shifted. The air felt heavier, thicker. It smelled distinct. It wasn't a bad smell exactly. It was the scent of stale, recycled air mixed with something metallic, like old pennies. It was strongest near the closet. The tipping point, the moment I knew I wasn't crazy, happened on a rainy Thursday night. I was lying in bed trying to study for a biology exam. My bed was pushed up against the wall that shared a partition with the walk-in closet. The apartment was silent, save for the rain lashing against the window pane. Scritch, scratch. The sound was faint, coming from inside the wall directly behind my head. I sat up, my heart leaping into my throat. Scritch, scratch, thud. It sounded like a rat, a big one. I imagined a rodent scurrying through the insulation, claws digging into the drywall. "Great," I muttered, grabbing a textbook. "Now I have rats." I banged the heavy book against the wall. "Shut up!" The scratching stopped instantly. Silence returned. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of before. It was a tense, listening silence. It felt like the wall was holding its breath. I went to sleep that night with the lights on. The next morning I called the landlord. He was a grumpy old man who clearly didn't care. He sent a maintenance guy over who spent 5 minutes looking for droppings, found none, and told me it was probably pipe settling. He left without doing anything. I felt helpless. But the worst was yet to come. That weekend I decided to deep clean the apartment to clear my head. I started with the closet. It was piled high with clothes, boxes, and junk. As I was pulling a box of winter coats out from the very back of the closet, I noticed something odd about the back wall. The closet was lined with cedar planks, a nice touch for an old building. But one of the planks, down near the floor in the far corner, looked polished. The wood around it was dull and dusty, but this specific plank looked like it had been handled. The oils from human skin had stained it slightly darker over time. I knelt down, shining my phone's flashlight into the corner. There was a knot in the wood of that plank, but upon closer inspection, the knot had been drilled out. It was a peephole, a tiny, perfect circle about the size of a dime. I leaned in closer. A cold draft hit my eye. The hole went all the way through to the hollow space behind the wall. And then I smelled it. That metallic, stale penny smell. It was wafting out of the hole, concentrated and pungent. I grabbed the edge of the plank. It felt loose. I pulled. It didn't require force. The plank swung inward on a silent, well-oiled hinge. It wasn't a wall. It was a door. Behind the cedar plank wasn't insulation or studs. It was a dark, hollow void. I should have run. Any rational person would have run, but my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I was paralyzed by a mixture of horror and confusion. I shined my flashlight into the hole. The space between the walls was surprisingly wide, maybe 3 feet. It was a utility chase that ran the height of the building, originally designed for ventilation shafts that had long since been removed. And someone was living in it. Directly behind my closet, in the cramped darkness of the wall void, was a makeshift living space. There was a sleeping bag, filthy and gray with grime. There were stacks of empty yogurt cups. My yogurt cups. There was a pile of turkey wrappers, and there were jars. Mason jars filled with yellow liquid. Urine. He had been storing it so he wouldn't have to leave the crawlspace to use a bathroom. But the thing that made me scream, the thing that finally broke my paralysis, was the decoration. Taped to the inside of the drywall, directly opposite the sleeping bag, were pictures. They weren't photos, they were Polaroid pictures. There was a picture of me sleeping, a picture of me changing clothes, a picture of me brushing my teeth, taken from behind. He hadn't just been watching me through the peephole, he had been coming out. He had been in my room while I slept. He had stood over my bed, silent as a shadow, and snapped photos of me while I dreamed. I scrambled back, crab walking away from the closet, my scream tearing through the apartment. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" As I scrambled back, I heard a sound from the void. Rustle. The sleeping bag moved. He was there. He wasn't out scavenging. He was in the sleeping bag, right now. A hand shot out from the darkness of the hole. It was filthy, the fingernails black with grime. It grasped the edge of the opening, not to pull the door shut, but to pull himself out. A face appeared in the gap. It was a man, gaunt and bearded, his skin the color of paste. His eyes were wide, adjusting to the sudden light, but they weren't angry, they were pleading. "Emily," he croaked. His voice was like dry leaves crushing together. He knew my name. "Don't go," he whispered, reaching toward me. "I made it nice for us." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I bolted. I ran out of the apartment, down the 3 flights of stairs and into the busy street, barefoot and screaming. The police arrived in minutes. They surrounded the building. They found him trying to squeeze back into the ventilation shaft to escape to the roof. His name was Patrick. He was a former tenant of the building who had been evicted 5 years prior. He knew the layout. He knew the dead spaces. When the police searched the void, they found more than just the sleeping bag. They found a journal. It detailed my schedule perfectly. 8 a.m., she leaves for class. 6 p.m., she comes home. 11 p.m., she sleeps. She looks peaceful tonight. But the entry from the night before, the night I banged on the wall, was the most chilling. She heard me. She knows. I have to move up the timeline. Tonight, I will bring her inside with me. We will be safe in the walls together. If I hadn't found that loose plank, If I hadn't decided to clean the closet that Saturday, I wouldn't be telling this story. I would be a missing person case, vanished from a locked apartment without a trace. I don't live in old buildings anymore. I live in a modern glass and steel condo where the walls are solid concrete. But even now, when I'm alone at night and the house settles, when I hear a faint scratch or a thud, I don't check the locks on the doors. I check the walls. I press my ear against the plaster and I listen. Because I know now that the monsters aren't under the bed. They are in the one place you can't see, living in the negative space of your life, waiting for the moment the wall comes down. We live in an era of convenience. With a few taps on a screen, we can summon a stranger to drive us to the airport, deliver our groceries, or walk our dogs. We hand over our digital keys, our gate codes, and our trust to algorithms, believing that a 5-star rating system is a guarantee of safety. We invite these ghosts into our sanctuaries, our homes, to scrub our toilets and fold our underwear, all while we are miles away at work. We pay them to erase the mess of our lives. But we never stop to ask, what are they leaving behind in the spaces they clean? And more importantly, do they ever truly leave? My name is Jason. I'm a mergers and acquisitions lawyer in downtown Chicago, which is a fancy way of saying I work 80 hours a week and my apartment is nothing more than a place to crash and shower. I live in a modern, high-security condo on the 30th floor. It's sterile, minimalist, and up until 6 months ago, was constantly a disaster zone of takeout boxes and laundry piles. I didn't have time to clean, so I did what everyone in my circle does. I downloaded an app called Pristine. It's like Uber for house cleaning. You set your preferences, upload your smart lock code, and a vetted cleaning professional comes by while you're at work. I matched with a cleaner named Elena. Her profile picture was generic, a smiling, middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She had a 4.9-star rating. Great, I thought. Hired. For the first 2 months, it was bliss. I'd schedule Elena for Tuesdays and Fridays. I'd leave a messy, chaotic apartment at 7 a.m., and when I returned at 9 p.m., it would be spotless. The floors gleamed. The bed was made with military precision, and the air smelled of lemon verbena and expensive bleach. It felt like magic. It was easy to ignore the small things at first. Normalization is a powerful defense mechanism. When you're exhausted, you rationalize everything. The first glitch happened on a Tuesday in November. I came home late, dragging my feet. I threw my briefcase on the sofa and went straight to the kitchen to grab a beer. The fridge was organized. Perfectly organized. All the labels were facing forward. But something was missing. I had bought a quart of milk on Monday. It was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty shelf. Maybe I finished it? I muttered. I couldn't remember. I grabbed a water instead and went to the bathroom to wash my face. That's when I noticed the toothbrush. My toothbrush was wet. Not damp, but wet. The bristles were dark with moisture, and there was a tiny bead of water still clinging to the handle. I hadn't brushed my teeth since 6:30 a.m. It was now 9:30 p.m. A cold shiver crawled up my neck. I stared at the brush. Did Elena use my toothbrush to scrub the grout? That was gross, but it was the only logical explanation. I threw it in the trash and opened a new one. I left a note on the app for the next cleaning. Please do not use personal toiletries for cleaning. Elena replied with a smiley face emoji. Understood. Sorry for the confusion. I let it slide. But the next week, the intrusion became more intimate. It was a Friday. I came home early for once, around 6 p.m. The apartment was silent. The cleaning was done. The job complete notification had hit my phone at 2 p.m. I walked into my bedroom to change out of my suit. The bed was made, the duvet pulled tight. I sat down on the edge of the mattress to take off my shoes. The sheets were warm. I froze. I placed my hand flat on the duvet. It wasn't the ambient warmth of the room. It was a localized heat, the kind that lingers after a body has been lying there for hours. It was centered right in the middle of the bed. I stood up, backing away. "Hello?" I called out, feeling ridiculous. The apartment was empty. I checked the closets. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. "It's the sun," I told myself. The afternoon sun hits the bedroom window. It must have warmed the duvet. But it was November in Chicago. The sun set at 4:30 p.m. I started to feel a creeping sense of paranoia. I felt like I was being watched in my own home. I changed the lock code on the door just in case. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I had a sudden cancellation at work. My 2 p.m. meeting was pushed, so I decided to swing by the apartment to grab some files I had left on the counter. I didn't check the app. If I had, I would have seen that Elena was scheduled for that day. I unlocked the door quietly. I didn't mean to be stealthy. I was just on a call with a client, my earbuds in. As soon as I stepped into the foyer, I smelled it. It wasn't lemon verbena. It wasn't bleach. It was the smell of cooking. Someone was making bacon and eggs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took the earbuds out. Sizzle. Pop. The sound was coming from the kitchen. I crept down the hallway. My first thought was that Elena was there, just finishing up. But why was she cooking? I peered around the corner. A woman was standing at my stove. It was Elena. She looked exactly like her profile picture, but she wasn't wearing a cleaning uniform. She was wearing my bathrobe. My oversized, plush gray bathrobe was wrapped around her small frame. Her hair was wet, wrapped in one of my towels. She was humming softly to herself, flipping eggs in my skillet, swaying to music only she could hear. She wasn't cleaning. She was living. I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. She looked so comfortable. She looked like she belonged there more than I did. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice loud and shaking. Elena spun around. The spatula clattered to the floor. Her eyes went wide. For a second, she looked terrified. But then her expression shifted. It didn't turn to anger. It turned to disappointment, like a wife who had been caught cheating. "Mr. Jason," she stammered, pulling the robe tighter. "You're home early?" "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "Get out now, or I'm calling the police." I was just taking a break," she said, her voice trembling. "The work is hard. I needed a shower." "You're cooking eggs," I yelled. "In my robe! Get out!" She scrambled to the guest bathroom where her clothes were piled. She dressed in 10 seconds flat and ran out the door, muttering apologies. I called the police. I called the app support. They banned her immediately, apologized profusely, and offered me a refund. The police took a report but said since nothing was stolen, it was technically just trespassing. I thought it was over. I thought I had caught a lazy employee taking advantage of an empty house. I was wrong. That night, unable to sleep in the bed she had clearly been napping in, I decided to strip the sheets. I was angry, fueled by adrenaline. I tore the sheets off the mattress. Then I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. It was coming from the master bathroom. I walked in. The shower was off. The sink was dry. Drip, drip. I looked up. The sound wasn't coming from the faucet. It was coming from the ceiling. Specifically, from the ventilation grate above the shower. A single drop of dark liquid fell from the grate and landed in the pristine white tub. It wasn't water. It was too viscous. I grabbed a step stool. I climbed up and shined my phone's flashlight into the ventilation grate. The screws on the grate were loose. I pulled it down. There was a crawl space up there. In these high-rise condos, there's a utility gap between floors for the HVAC systems. It's tight, dusty, and full of wires. I shined the light into the darkness. Oh God. It wasn't just a crawl space. It was a nest. There was a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner. There were stacks of my canned food. There were bottles of my wine. And there were photos. Taped to the metal ductwork were printed screenshots. They were screenshots from the Pristine app. Not just of my profile, but of dozens of other men. Single men. Professionals. But the thing that made me vomit, the thing that forced me to sell the condo the very next week, was what I found directly above the vent. There was a small, battery-operated baby monitor camera pointed directly down through the slats of the vent. It was pointed at my shower. Elena hadn't just been taking a break when I caught her. She had been living in the crawl spaces of her clients for months. The police investigation revealed she had keys to 5 other units in the building. She would clean during the day, yes, but at night, she didn't go home. She would crawl up into the vents. She would watch. When I was showering, she was watching. When I was sleeping, she was listening. And that drop of liquid, it wasn't water. It was condensation from a water bottle she had knocked over in her haste to escape when I came home early. She had been up there while I was yelling at her in the kitchen. The woman in the kitchen, the one I caught, wasn't Elena. It was her sister. The real Elena, the one with the 4.9-star rating, was the one hiding in the ceiling. And she was never caught. I live in a house now, no vents large enough for a person. I clean my own floors. I scrub my own toilets. Because every time I see a cleaning in progress sign or see a maid cart in a hallway, I don't see convenience anymore. I see a woman in a crawl space, holding her breath, waiting for the water to turn on.